So I'm going to read this article. It's 8 minutes, and it basically is validating what I was saying. So some of these people get on here and they say, oh, that was old. That's not happening. That's not true. So let's go here and look at the date on this here. This article right here. Okay. So this article is basically talking about some of the things that we've heard on the news. If you've been, listening about what I believe it's JRFK Jr., what he's trying to do. So, okay, let's see here. Continue reading here. Okay, I should take this out. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Now, are you looking at what I'm looking at here? Millions of low-income households would lose food aid under. Okay, what date is this here? February 24, 2025. Substantial cuts to SNAP program would mean households with low income in every state would lose support they need to put food on the table, worsening food insecurity and hardship. So these are for these people who act like, oh, that's not going to happen. Okay, millions of low-income households would lose food aid under proposed House Republican SNAP cuts. Okay, so that's what food stamps, SNAP benefits. So House Republican budget would mean higher costs, less help for families, more tax windfalls for the wealthy. Okay, so that is other topics that are. So what's the date here? Take a good look. February 24, 2025. That's this year. Okay? I want you to take a good look at that. The budget resolution that the House plans to take up this week, all right, directs the House Agriculture Committee to cut programs in its jurisdiction by at least $230 billion through 2034. That is years away from us. Okay, so this is over a period of time. With these cuts expected to come, let me go back, $230 billion all the way through to year 2034. With these cuts expected to come largely or entirely from this SNAP program, which is known as Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and to be used to help pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest business owners and households. The narrower budget resolution adopted by the Senate instructs the Senate Agriculture Committee to cut at least $1 billion over the same period through the actual cuts sought through this process, and in a second budget resolution expected later this year, which is 2025, could be much deeper. Substantial cuts to SNAP would mean households with low incomes in every state would lose support they need to put food on the table, worsening insecurity and hardship. Okay, so the specific policies the House and the Senate Agriculture Committee will pursue to make these cuts are still unknown, okay? But this is what they are proposing. But I added that in there, okay? So I'm letting you know this is what they're looking at doing. But one thing is clear, lawmakers cannot cut $230 billion, okay? That's what they claim, or anything close to that amount from SNAP without slashing benefits, okay? So they're basically showing you that they couldn't make those cuts without slashing benefits altogether, restricting eligibility, or some combination of both. Republican lawmakers could make these benefit or eligibility cuts directly through changes through federal SNAP policies, but they could also enact them indirectly by shifting costs to states, forcing state officials to decide whose benefits will be cut and by how much they're going to cut them. Regardless of how Republican lawmakers enact a cut of this magnitude, this would slash more than 20% from a program that helps more than 40 million people, including 1 of 5 children, afford groceries. Massive cuts would result, this is how the result would impact, in widespread harm, is what they're saying. Lawmakers may use several harmful options to impose these deep SNAP cuts, including immediately cutting benefits for all SNAP participants by an average of $1.40 per day. Lawmakers could cut SNAP by $230 billion by rolling back the 2021 update to the Thrifty Food Plan, which is TFP, and permanently freezing its costs outside of annual inflation adjustments based on a recent Congressional Budget Office estimate. So the 2021 update to the TFP, which is the basis for SNAP benefit levels, adjusted the real purchasing power of SNAP benefits for the first time in nearly 60 years to account for changes in dietary guidance and how low-income households shop for and prepare food. The resulting increase in SNAP benefits lifted more than 2 million people, including nearly 1 million children, above poverty line when went into effect, with the greatest poverty reducing impact for Black and Hispanic individuals as well. So reversing this update, so that's what they're proposing doing, reversing it and restricting future increases, would slash SNAP benefits for all participants immediately upon taking effect, with the cut growing deeper over time. So it sounds like they want to make cuts gradually over a period of time. Remember, I said 2030 all up until 2034. So they're proposing looking at doing this and starting this. So the average SNAP benefits in fiscal of 2026 is projected to be only $6.40 per person per day. So under this proposal, each SNAP participant would lose an average of $1.40 per day, initially cutting the daily average benefit to only $5 per person. But by 2030, the year of 2034, this policy would slash the average daily benefit from $8 per person. So it's a gradual slashing, to only about $5.85 based on our analysis and CBO's projection. So this would make it more difficult for more than 40 million people to afford groceries, 90% of whom are in households with children, older adults, and people with disabilities. So taking SNAP away from more than 9 million low-income people in an average month. So if lawmakers don't want to cut SNAP benefits, as the Representative G.T. Thomas, chair of the House of Agriculture Committee, has indicated, they could instead make these cuts by ending SNAP eligibility entirely for certain participants. That's even worse. But reaching $230 billion in cuts solely through reduced participation would require removing more than 9 million people receiving the average benefit from SNAP in a typical month. So because nearly all SNAP households include children and older adults or someone with a disability, it would not be possible to completely protect those households from an eligibility cut this massive. So even existing proposals that would take food away from some households with children, older adults, people with disabilities would not cut enough to meet $230 billion target. So, for example, a proposal from Representative, or Republican actually is what it means, Dusty Johnson, to dramatically expand SNAP existing harsh work requirement could take away food assistance from millions of people. Okay, so currently SNAP participation is limited to only 3 months in a year period for most adults age 18 to 54 years of age without children in the home, unless they can demonstrate that they are working at least 20 hours a week. So you have to demonstrate that you have a job and you're working 20 hours a week to even participate and get those benefits, or prove that they qualify for an exemption, such as having a disability. So Johnson proposal would expand this punitive work requirement to older adults as well, up to the age of 65, and parents, grandparents, and households with children age 7 or older. Veterans people would be experiencing homelessness, youth who have aged out of the foster care, and people who live in areas without sufficient jobs. So CBO previously estimated that a similar policy would take away SNAP from 3 to 3.5 million people in an average month. So, but the harm of this policy that they're trying to implement would not be limited to individuals being cut off SNAP. Everyone in a household would also receive less help to buy groceries. So, for example, 4 million children between the ages of 7 and 17 live in households that would be at risk for losing some amount of the food assistance under this proposal. But even this draconian policy would make only a fraction of House Republicans' $230 billion target. So that's what they're proposing doing. They want to cut it by $230 billion. So what this is actually outlining is telling you they got different ways that they could try to cut it. They could do it gradually, or they could do it drastically. Whatever they do, they're saying that it still may not meet that very target, but they said they can't just meet that target without cutting a lot of people off of that program that dramatically. So so 230 billion target is what they're looking at, CBO estimated. So if lawmakers pursue it in reconciliation legislation, they would have to combine it with other harmful policies as well, like taking help away from even more people to reach their deep cut target. Okay, so multiple studies have shown that the SNAP program work requirement takes food away from people without leading to increase employment or earnings. So that suggests that the vast majority of 3 to 3.5 million people would lose the assistance that they needed to buy the groceries without any improvement in their employment perspectives or prospects. So most SNAP participants who can work or who can do the work either while they are receiving SNAP or within a year, but because this requirement substantially increases red tape for the participants and state agencies, even people who are working can be cut off of that program if they can't successfully document enough of the hours that they're making during a work period. So similarly, people who would not be subject to the work requirement, an example, because they have a disability, can lose benefits if their state fails to screen them for an exemption as well. So shifting benefit costs to states. Now that's the other way of them proposing this, which would force them to cut benefits eligibility or both. So because the benefit or eligibility cuts required to achieve this target plan of 230 billion in SNAP cuts would likely be deeply unpopular, Republican lawmakers may force state officials to make them instead. States pay half of the cost of administering SNAP, but the federal government funds 100% of the benefit costs, which make up a vast majority of program costs. So virtually all states must balance their budget each year, so shifting even a small portion of the SNAP benefit cost to the states would require states to raise revenues. So a small portion of benefit costs would require states to raise revenue or cut funding from for other programs or services as well. So this would strain the state's budgets and likely force states to cut SNAP benefits eligibility or both, which is very radical and very, very devastating to a lot of people who need that program. So I'm saying that, I'm adding that in there. So this radical, they're using that word, radical change of SNAP funding structure would abandon the long-standing national commitment to provide low-income households SNAP benefits sufficient to afford a basic healthy diet. So it could also create substantial disparities between states. States with lower incomes and higher rates of poverty would likely have a much harder time funding a share of SNAP benefit costs than wealthier states, exacerbating hardships in states that already are struggling with high rates of food insecurity and poverty. So a cost sharing requirement also would be particularly harmful during recession times, when states would need to provide more of the state funds to accommodate increased need as more people lose incomes and become eligible for the program. At the same time, the state revenues are declining. Okay, so in a weak economy, each dollar in additional spending on SNAP benefits generates $1.54 in economic activity when households use their benefits to shop at local stores in their communities. But states may lack the funds to provide those additional resources, resulting in increased food insecurities, undermining SNAP's ability to act as an economic stimulus and hindering economy recovery. Program integrity measures could not make cuts of this magnitude. So that's what the lawmakers could not make cuts like $230 billion in SNAP solely through program integrity measures. Cases of intentional fraud by participants or SNAP authorized retailers are relatively rare. Most overpayments identified through SNAP's uniquely rigorous quality control systems are the result of unintentional mistakes by eligibility workers or households, not fraud. So even if the lawmakers could somehow eliminate overpayments, which is not realistic, there aren't enough of them to add up to about $230 billion in cuts. So other important measures that would strengthen the program integrity, such as enhancing the security of EBT cards to prevent electronic benefit theft, have associated implementation costs that would likely modestly increase federal spending. So cuts would weaken SNAP's proven effectiveness. So deep SNAP cuts would worsen food insecurity, hurt local businesses, and weaken SNAP's ability to boost jobs in every state. So SNAP is highly effective at reducing food insecurity and poverty, and research links SNAP participation to better health outcomes and lower health care costs. So regardless of how lawmakers impose this policy of $230 billion or more in cuts to SNAP, these cuts would make it harder for low-income families in every state to afford groceries, worsening food insecurity and hardships, slashing low-income household grocery budgets, would also reduce revenue for the thousands of businesses in every state, with ripple effects throughout the food supply chain. So that's basically, they're showing people in every state that would be harmed by this proposed policy of $230 billion cut to SNAP program. So it goes all the way. You can look at this. If you want to look at this article, it tells you how it would impact a lot of people in all the states, all 50 states. Okay? For those people who think that I just made this up, I didn't make it up. So that's basically the graph, and it shows you all of the people, SNAP participants at risk of losing some or all benefits. Okay. And then the share of $230 billion SNAP cuts for 2026 all the way to 2034. Okay. Authorized retailers at risk, they give you the grid of that, a graph proposing. These are the proposals that they want to put in place, the people, the administration that we have right now. Let's go back up to here so that you know this was February 24, 2025. This is by Katie Burr. And so cuts would take assistance away from people in every state. So millions of low-income households, let me say this again, will lose food aid under a proposed House Republican SNAP cuts. So this is what they are trying to do. So for those of you that think that I made it up, I did not make it up. All right, so that's proof right there.